And this is a virtual meeting, and we will open it up to public comment on different items. And certainly at the end, we'll use the raise hand function so we know you're interested in talking, and then we will unmute you so you can speak. So let's do a roll call and see who is here. Mr. Flint.
Here.
Mr. Bosdet.
Here.
Ms. Orvidal.
Here.
Ms. Miller.
Here.
And that's who I see for now. And hopefully Alan and Kate will be joining us shortly. So today on the agenda, thanks Haley for preparing some info on green zoning and sustainability. And thanks also to Kate Hanley for joining us, our town sustainability director. And we probably have some other folks who are very knowledgeable about this as well. So we certainly welcome your input during public comment, or we might even have questions that you might have the answers to. After that discussion, and this is hopefully the beginning or the continuance of many discussions about green zoning, I did want to kind of segue into taking a position, what the board's position about Article 31 is, about that home rule petition. And then we'll have any other follow-up about the public hearing that we had, and Susan from the select board was giving us some information about that. Looks like we've got one A&R, couple of administrative items to do, as well as introduce you to kind of an oncoming board member who is on the line with us, Andrew. And so we'll get to Andrew kind of towards the end as well. So any other announcements or things that we need to make sure we don't forget? All right, then Haley, we'll turn it over to you and Elizabeth for kind of your presentation, and let us know if you'd like us to wait till the end to ask questions, or if we should kind of let you know as you go.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's not super long, so you know, if it makes sense to wait till the end, let's do that. So, you know, I put this together pretty quick and high level, I think, and hope, as a way to just really get, you know, the planning board especially talking and planning for 2022. I mean, I still am relatively new to the board, and it's very clear, like, sustainability is one of the key items for the town in general, but also the planning board. And we just, it's obvious we need to plan way more in advance that usually I'm capable of, but like to just kind of, you know, make sure we have enough time to, you know, have the concepts out there and decide on what we actually want to do in a bigger way, maybe for 2022. I think we've done, you know, bits and pieces since I've been around anyways, on PRDs and the earth removal, but I think the message I've been getting from most everybody in town is like, let's just go bigger, right? Let's have a bigger impact. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So I honestly thought this was just useful for me. I mean, I hear the word sustainability like every day, and you know, I started to like need to remind myself, like, what does it actually mean, and what does that mean in the context of zoning? You know, so I am a solar developer. I spend every day reading zoning, and I'm on the other side of it, and I think, you know, it's kind of helpful for me to think about, you know, what I should be doing, you know, seeing other towns zoning, like I know what to expect when I walk into a town as a developer. And so just understanding like the importance of sustainability and what it means in the context of like what the town is trying to achieve and what it wants to prioritize. So anyways, I just thought the definition was useful to revisit, like as we think about what we should do, and then the kind of categories to consider. And I think, again, being in the electricity industry in particular, like all of us probably tend to think immediately about energy use, and understanding that like we aren't able to generally have that much impact on you know, net zero like we want to, and the electricity code. And so it was a good reminder to me that like that's not just the one thing that matters. Like topics like water use and then soil, water, and land use protection are also some of the categories to consider. So just to like set that context. Go ahead, Elizabeth. So also just, good reminder, honestly, to me and maybe to everybody else, but, again, we've heard a lot about Article 51 and what the goal was there. And I think this slide or this graphic is pretty telling, like really how far we need to go as a town. And it's just obviously planning board is one leg of the stool to get there, but we have a long road ahead of us to hit the target that we're going to need to hit on the emissions side of things. And this graphic is from Kate. So yeah, again, just sort of setting the context for like why this is so important. And then, again, as I personally had been thinking about it, I got excited about the new climate bill and Article 31. And so I started to think to myself, like, wait, is there actually anything else we should be doing? Like, aren't we good to go now? And the answer is definitely not. There are things to be excited about in the climate bill, the new stretch code. And then, very curious to see what comes out of the sort of the caps on heating fuel and like how that's going to trickle down to us at a town level. But that is coming, but all this stuff is going to take a while. And so, we as a planning board need to think about what can we do faster to have a more immediate impact, ideally starting in 2022. And I know we'll talk about Article 31 today, Kristen, but, again, I honestly, I felt like I needed to take the time to like understand and internalize that all these things are great that they've happened or might happen, but that, it doesn't mean our work is done. So. And so, of course, we had the discussion with Kate and others from our, they gave the list to us from RMI. And so we've already, there's no need to like reinvent the wheel. And so what I thought would be useful is to just, talk about a few in particular that seem to be, the most in our control and doable for us this year to get in place and propose for 2022. And that's, getting better at collecting data when we can in our own planning board processes, and then talking very seriously about overlay districts where they make sense, and then creating and just sort of making more widespread the use of like a checklist. And we can talk about what that might look like and where that gets incorporated, and maybe it's just simply something more formal in our sustainability review that already exists for some of the special permits. So some of these others, clearly weren't as in our control in the planning board, or just, mostly it felt like they were out of our purview, and less doable for us this next year anyways. Next slide. So related to collecting data, again, not really highlighting anything that new here that wasn't already in the RMI sheet that Gary and others had given to us from RMI, but just highlighting it here more specifically. I know I kind of glazed over it the first time around, but really kind of been spending a lot more time internalizing what it might mean for us. And this is, perhaps not too dissimilar to what is in the earth removal, where we're kind of asking for an alternative analysis, but really asking the applicant to put the work in to show us, what the cost comparison is and like what the differences in the alternatives are. We obviously can't require net zero all the time, but we still can make them go through the exercise and collect the data for the alternatives. And so that, again, they're forced to like right, go have their contractors tell them the differences in the costs, especially if they're telling us it's not possible. So at the very least, we have the data at the end of the day. The second bullet was something Gary suggested. I don't really know if it's in our ability to control or if it's the building department, but thinking about the same thing for really anything that requires a building permit, retrofits especially being the obvious one there. So that doesn't necessarily go through the planning board, but is there a way we can still, if existing building stock is going to go through something that needs a building permit, have them make that an opportunity to collect some data on like why they decided to retrofit to a gas alternative versus an electric one. And so the question I had was, especially on the first bullet, like, is this just a clarification of our sustainability review, or like do we actually need to do anything, propose anything new, or can we build it into what is already existing, which is the sustainability review that we already have. And so that's probably a question for Elizabeth, I guess. And then on the overlay districts, there's a lot more going on here, but my kind of takeaway was this is our best chance, especially given Northampton and what they've done, our best chance to require fossil-free development in the most immediate term. And so looking at where emissions come from in town, and like what are the low-hanging fruit for us to be able to influence, it seems very clear that we should be making sure that any new like large commercial development, especially Throw District and StarMet, like are required to be net zero or fossil fuel free. And then even thinking bigger maybe is something like a sustainable growth overlay district, like what Northampton has done. Zone C could be the most obvious area to focus on, just given that is where most of the teardowns tend to be, and that's kind of the most those are the areas where there is the most walkability, where we're really trying to create more density. And Northampton has a lot of language it seems like we could use there. And then the last one is I haven't really sanity checked this with anybody yet, but again, I as a solar developer run into this quite a lot in restrictions on development in prime forest, or more often it tends to be prime ag or prime soils. But looking at it from Concord's perspective, I think prime forest tends to be more at risk of depletion than prime ag probably. In town. So, thinking about an overlay and not necessarily, a blanket restriction on development. I don't even know if that's possible anyways, but just some way to like flag that there is and have a bigger, better review process for anything that is intended to, basically take down prime forest as it's identified by the Mass GIS online tool in town. And again, here's just an example here from a town in Washington, New York, and they created an ag overlay district, and just the basic language is there. But yeah, just something to think about, I guess, as not thinking as much on the fossil fuel free, but something bigger than just the tree protection bylaw. But that's kind of the third one as far as overlay districts are concerned, and looking at precedent out there. And then the last concept, kind of a variation of the first one maybe, but like the sustainability climate checklist. Just and I know, Elizabeth, a year or so ago we talked about the one town in New Hampshire having like a checklist But yeah, just kind of more formalizing what the sustainability review process is and what we're looking for. And so, you know, developers or applicants like know exactly how we'll be evaluating them. And yeah, again, it sounds like we may or may not have an ability to say like, you must do X, Y, Z, but at least it forces them to go through the exercise. And like, yeah, I guess if an applicant has scored like at the lowest level for every single thing, that's probably like an indication that they failed the the sustainability review and need to figure out, you know, where they need to do better. So what the outcome is of the checklist, I don't quite know, or I guess open to discussion for, you know, what it means if you have the lowest score on every single item. Like, do we as the planning board get to tell them, hey, you need to be at least like above average on, 2 out of 10 criteria, or like, I don't know, like, but just thinking about if it should be more formalized and specific for what we'll be looking for. I think there's only one more slide. So, I just thought this was useful for my own benefit, again, more than anything else. Maybe it's useful to others, but like to try to understand where all of our policies, if you will, related to sustainability or bylaws or whatever you want to call them, like fit relative to like the sustainability criteria, and then in what kind of sector. Again, kind of comparing it to where the emissions come from, or the breakdown of the emissions in town. It's obviously interesting to see how high transit is, but it isn't clear that the planning board has a lot of ability to influence or help reduce emissions in transit necessarily, other than creating more walkability and higher dense areas. And so that perhaps comes in the sustainable growth overlay district. And then reducing truck trips in the existing hopefully to be approved earth removal bylaw. And then probably no surprise, like most everything we work on tends to be new construction focused. And then I don't know if there's anything else we can do for existing buildings, or if I've categorized everything appropriately, but like this is, I guess, how I saw it shaking out. And I don't know if it's completely accurate or not, but just thought it was interesting to lay it out there in these sectors. And that's it. It's pretty quick and dirty, just trying to like start the conversation.
Thank you for putting it together, and I appreciate how you've got kind of that more holistic look at things, and so that's helpful. A couple of points of clarification for planning board members and everybody listening. Article 51, does anyone, I don't know if Kate wants to summarize it, Kate Hanley or Haley, can you just summarize? We always talk about Article 51, but how do you describe that to the average resident?
Can give it a go. So Article 51 was that 2017 town meeting, and that set the town of Concord's climate goals, and specifically set a goal of 80% greenhouse gas reduction community-wide by 2050, and a 2020 target of 25% community-wide emissions reduction. It also created my position.
Excellent, thanks. So I just want to make sure. And just out of curiosity, why do we think we fell short of that goal? And Elizabeth, I don't know if you can put that slide back up again.
Early this year, I finished a 2019 greenhouse gas inventory. So greenhouse gas inventory is a way that we measure community-wide emissions. It's an activity-based method. So it looks at things that happened in town, or emissions that were a result of things that happened in town. So fuel burned in buildings and vehicles primarily. And so what you can see here, this chart with the lines is originally from our climate action plan that came out last summer. And at that time, the 2016 inventory was the latest data we had. So that kind of current pace shows the drop between 2008, which is our baseline, and 2016. And it was about an average of 1% a year. So this graph really jumped out at a lot of people because it showed at 1% a year, we're really far off that target line. So I mapped on top of this the 2019 emissions because you can see there was a pretty big drop. From 2008 to 2019, it was 22% drop. So that's what Haley said was short of our 25% by 2020 goal. Because it was 22%, not quite that 25. But it looks good, right? Because it's below that target line. But a lot of the reason that our emissions dropped 22% from 2008 was because of CMLP's efforts to increasingly provide carbon-free electricity. So it was at 50% in 2019. So looking at, that's gonna max out at 100% carbon-free, right? And so we then will, from there on, stop seeing those benefits of our electricity becoming cleaner, and it gets harder. So that's that orange dot is, if we continue to use the same types of fuels and the same amounts as we did in 2019, even with our 100% carbon-free electricity, it only gets us to 32% reduction overall. So that's definitely short of our 2050 goal. So it's a long way of saying this all comes from our 2019 greenhouse gas inventory. And there's a summary report on the sustainability website that anyone can check out if they're interested in some of the details.
Kate, I'm sorry, Kristen.
No, go ahead.
Of that current the current emissions, can you give us rough figures in terms of how much is electricity production, how much is residential heating, and how much is transportation, and how much is commercial? I'm just kind of wondering what size of a target as a planning board we can aim at.
Yeah, so about 60% of the emissions are from buildings. And between of that 60%, it's about half and half commercial and residential buildings. So that's a combination of electricity and natural gas and oil. Natural gas makes up about 50% of building emissions. Electricity is an increasingly small percentage. I can pull up the numbers, have those off the top of my head.
Right, okay. Those rough numbers are very helpful. Okay. So Kristen, what are your thoughts on where you want to go from here? I think it's helpful to have some sort of goals as we have these general discussions.
Yeah, and I thought that Haley's kind of thinking about things that the planning board could influence was good. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you can put that on. Actually, the other thing that I wanted to define is, Elizabeth, can you put that slide up one more time with the RMI and kind of the list of things that we could affect? And for those listening at home, RMI is the Rocky Mountain Institute. And we had some town residents that were participating with kind of like an accelerator program where they really gained a lot of knowledge from research that this nonprofit has done. So Haley, thanks for kind of focusing in on some of these things. I just had a quick question. You might not know the answer to this because I might have to dig into more of the RMI stuff, but do you know what change composition of zoning and planning board meant?
Yeah, they had only one example under there, and it was actually the city of Boston. They were trying to push through, and I didn't look to see if it when it happened or if it did, but basically like a requirement to have at least one planning board member who is like somewhat of a climate expert.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I was just curious. So thank you for giving some context. And then Elizabeth, can you go to kind of the perhaps kind of close to the end where Haley has kind of that matrix? Or did anybody on the planning board have questions about kind of those two slides? What can the planning board influence? And I think, Burton, to answer your question, what do we want to do for today? I know town meeting 2021 is coming up in just a few weeks, but to Haley's point and to what we've discussed, we do want to figure out how to move from here to town meeting 2022. So thinking about what makes the most sense to learn more about in the next few months that would influence that. And I guess one of the things that I was thinking about was, particularly for the sustainability criteria, is the main thing that when we do plan review, I mean, clearly we have sustainability criteria in planned residential developments now, but we also do plan review of, Elizabeth, can you kind of describe what projects come to the board where we would review sustainability criteria if we had more?
So currently what comes before the board would be any project that has a site plan requirement, and that would be one of criteria H under the site plan review is the sustainability criteria. Understanding that not every project, some projects may require site plan review. They may not be of a nature where doing some spectacular sustainability element is part of that project. So the board has seen that just a couple of times, but generally those would be site plans, and also from a recommendation standpoint, if the planning board is making a recommendation on a special permit with site plan review, that would be something that the board would roll into their recommendation to the Board of Appeals. So one question that comes to mind is, and it comes down more to a legal question. I'm not sure if it is possible from a zoning act and state law perspective to have a sustainability criteria for special permits. I think that's something that could be, looked into, but understanding there's a lot of special permits where, it's the extension of a non-conforming structure. It's a residential structure where they're putting on a screened-in porch that doesn't meet setbacks. And so there's a lot of special permit projects that, once again, the homeowner's not doing a project that would even begin to include any type of retrofit to that level. But that's one aspect for larger projects. It is now, as with the PRD amendments, it's included in PRDs. But I think having it in the site plan criteria was one of the bigger elements for moving forward. I think the sustainability checklist, that was something that Kate and I talked about a while ago. So I know that's already on her radar, and I think Kate's already started pulling something together like that. So that's definitely something that I think would be beneficial, not only for the board, but for applicants. Again, it goes down to a legal question. To Haley's point, when you have a checklist, but the checklist scorecard idea, whether it's even possible for the board to implement something where it says you have to have a minimum score. I'm not sure if that's legally something that the planning board could do under site plan review, but again, that's a good question, and something that we'll just need to ask that questions of the right people. But I think having a sustainability checklist is definitely going in the right direction.
So for tonight, I think I'd like to hear from the board, and we'll open it up to public comment as well. I'd like to hear what you think would be that the board could do that would have kind of the biggest impact over helping the town meet those climate goals, based on kind of what Haley said so far and what's within our purview, your understanding of that. So, that way we can kind of prioritize how we want to research some of these things as next steps. So what do you think of kind of the suggestions Haley had, or other suggestions that maybe were left off the list? Do you think the planning board has control over that would have the biggest impact? And it can be more than one thing. I just want to kind of prioritize.
Kristen, I think to get to that discussion, it would be, Haley, thank you very much for putting together all those materials. I think that in my mind, this is a really complicated issue because what I want to be able to do things that have real impact, but taking into account that we've got our zone where we can operate, and separately there are people in the state doing things with maybe the stretch code, or people at the federal government, maybe they'll do a carbon tax, or whatever those tools might be. We have sort of a pretty limited tool set, I think, at the planning board level, operating within the constraints of the zoning code and the state, the state building code and the like. What I don't want to do is layer on things that maybe to some small degree move the ball forward, but it impose a great deal, additional cost on folks. So I just happened to be reading some minutes for the Economic Vitality Committee, right? And they were talking about problems that, businesses can't get anything done in town. And one of the things they pointed to was the planning board. I want to make sure that the degree we are putting additional requirements on something, that there's a real return on that. And that it's been thought through in the context of the other regulatory or legal actors in the space, right?
Yeah, Burton, just to clarify though, and that's why I went through that exercise of like, okay, when is the climate bill going to kick in and actually help us do what we've been wanting to do for a long time? And like, the point is like, it's going to be years to even get anywhere close to, being able to, improve the stretch code. And so I guess the way I have been thinking about this is like, we need to do something immediately. And like, we can always like take away an overlay district in 3 years when it's no longer relevant, like whatever. But it seems like we are able to move faster than, the state is at this point.
And that's a great point. What I just want to make sure is that we act wisely in coming up with a tool which achieves a measurable goal that has a cost which is commensurate, right? As opposed, so I was worried about, for example, an overlay district that would prevent people from developing forest or farmland that they own, right? And I know you weren't saying absolutely, but a lot of people in town are not going to want that, right? They're going to object to that, or requiring solar siting for all new construction. A lot of people are going to say, well, that means you have to cut down more trees. And I thought we were protecting trees, right? So I'm talking about balancing those things. And it would be, what I'm really curious about, Elizabeth, is whether, some of these Massachusetts, groups of town planners, have been looking at this and looking specifically within Massachusetts legal framework of the Massachusetts zoning code and what's allowed within Massachusetts, as whether there are model provisions or things that people have done in this area at the zoning code level, at the town zoning code level.
So there are definitely towns that are moving forward. I think in Haley, your presentation was Northampton.
Yeah.
It's already active.
Yeah, so Northampton's adopted things. But I think all of the towns are going about and doing these, one step. And so far, I haven't seen anything that was a major step forward.
Yeah,
it was Belmont last year tried, and the AG said no, you can't. So once again, as you said, it's the climate action bill is great, but it takes so long for things to get through. And so to move forward with something that, the Attorney General is just going to say, no, you can't do that, becomes very frustrating. So
yeah, and that's kind of what I'm worried about, right? I bet many towns have planning boards like ours where there are dedicated people who really want to make a change here, but they're trying to regulate in an area where you're going to run into the Attorney General saying, no, that's beyond the scope of your authority, right?
Yeah, but I think that's why if we just, like, Northampton's already been approved by the AG, like, that's why we should stick to what's already been done, because it already exists.
And the list from the whole intent of the RMI Accelerator was coming out of the AG's decision on Brookline's bylaw to say what is actually legally possible. So all
So
of the
is RMI specific to Massachusetts? You're saying?
No, but they did, this is a document that I think Gary Kleiman shared with us, which does have kind of Massachusetts specific type things. And it's been a while since we kind of looked at this, but it definitely shows, here's something that they did in Somerville with, density bonuses and Acton. And so I think that group did try to collect Massachusetts specific things. And this is several things. Some of them are incentives and some of them are zoning and things like that. So I think that would be probably something to look at.
Where is that document?
It was sent to us, but it's been quite a while. I wonder if it's on the website anywhere. This is, from a while ago, and Gary Kleiman is on the line now.
Yeah, hi. I would just say that the RMI Accelerator program, Gary Kleiman, 57 Central Street. Sorry to just butt in, but since you mentioned my name, I would just say the RMI Accelerator group was a cohort of 17 towns, all from Massachusetts.
Okay.
And RMI is a national organization. I think they have cohorts in other states, but this program was focused exclusively on Massachusetts and Massachusetts law and what's allowed within Massachusetts law, to Burton's point. And yes, they did develop this particular document, which is a smattering of examples of green zoning initiatives in towns in Massachusetts. And I think that's what, Haley had tried to build off of, to say, what could the town of Concord do within Massachusetts zoning, and, going a little bit beyond some of the examples here, but it's specific.
So,
Thank you.
Kristen, for the board, as you move forward in this direction on your goals and projects website, you have, Thoreau Depot Business District, you have, housing. So there'll now be a sustainability, green zoning and sustainability. So those documents will start being added to that page. I'm not sure if the RMI Accelerator is anywhere else on the town's website. So, Kate, I don't think it is. So
I don't
it'll
think so.
start. Yeah. So I'll just start populating that page. So like Haley's presentation will go up there, and other items like that.
Great. So we, as Elizabeth mentioned, we do want to start formulating this time of year. We start thinking about, as I know town meeting is coming up, but we start thinking about the goals for the year. And so I think that's where we should go, is, what is our goal that we want to achieve? And it doesn't have to necessarily be a bylaw amendment, but, if we're working towards that, and that way we can capture that. And Linda, Kate, Nathan, want to hear kind of your voices. And Kate, I forgot to acknowledge you when you arrived about 7:15. So thank you for joining us, Ms. McEnany. Do you guys have questions or comments that might kind of help us to move forward? We're hearing, one, we want to do everything we can do. And two, we have, limits on what the purview of the planning board is, both kind of what we are asked to do and also what legally we're bound by. So what other comments or questions do you guys have?
I have a question. So I know we can't just, for the moment, we can't just outright not allow new construction with fossil fuel tie-ins if they're available. But outside of incentives, can we direct, so if we were to, I guess I'm thinking, like, if we were to structure things to allow for incentivizing in some way, where we also still allow for, gas cooktops, because I know that's obviously something we've heard from builders before, that people want those, but move them away from fossil fuel-based, heating systems. Is that something we can work on to just structure an incentive, whether it's, on affordable housing or density or something like that. We've talked about this a little bit, but I think we keep running into, when we just approach builders with sort of a no fossil fuel period, they kind of freak out. And it's been typically around, saying that buyers want, gas ranges, things like that. But when it comes to the heating systems, which I would imagine are the bigger polluters than a gas cooktop, is there something we can do around that? And also toward, when it comes to existing houses, in terms of gut renovations and things like that, is there some level that that we can say, okay, this also applies to that sort of permit?
And see, that's where I think it's building permit and construction codes, building codes that impact that, versus, that's why when I was asking Elizabeth what comes in front of the planning board, that we would actually have, an ability to review or have a checklist about. It seems somewhat relatively limited based on kind of the whole pool of construction.
So it definitely is, when you look at the whole pool of construction, it's definitely what the planning board can influence directly is limited from a planning board perspective. So, Haley's comment about data collection, the planning board does not have the ability to direct the building inspections division to do anything. That is something that would be through the select board, town manager, and possibly even have to be some type of general bylaw. And to Nathan's point, as far as incentives, again, for the planning board's perspective, it gets back to Burton's comment of balance. So you can definitely develop a zoning bylaw that allows for a density bonus for development if they go to all electric. You're not allowing them to, they can develop their property, but if they go all electric, you can provide them a density bonus. Well, that's where you get to the other side. In that particular neighborhood, the neighborhood may not want a denser development for that site, and say, give them the gas. I don't want more houses there, or a denser development will require additional trees being taken down. And so that's, to Burton's point, that's where that frustrating balance comes with land use. And how I see it, all the realm of sustainability, some of it is land use, some of it is not. Some of it is change in behavior, change in building code requirements, change in the economy. Currently it's an extra $36,000 just in lumber to build a house. Currently you can't even get the lumber, and currently you may not even be able to get sheetrock pretty soon. You can't get appliances. So it's kind of all of those. Say if somebody wants a house and it's, oh, I'd really like that electric stove. Well, you won't get one for 6 months, but we have this nice gas stove. So sustainability crosses all of these things. To Nathan, your question on incentives, besides a density bonus, there's lots of other incentives. Just the residential homeowner who's remodeling their kitchen or doing something, maybe the town could say, okay, we're going to take $1,000 off your building permit fee if you go all electric. Well, that's not in the planning board's purview. That's a conversation for the select board and the finance committee. So there's all of these options. And again, it gets back to, how far can the planning board go in all of those options?
Kristen, if I may, what I think would be really helpful now, we've got the presentation from Haley, and we've got this list of the all the various bylaws passed in Massachusetts towns that have passed muster. Maybe a thing to do would be for its homework, each board member to go and take a look at those lists of bylaws and Haley's list and identify, based upon the board member's view of what fits well for Concord. So for example, density bonus, it might work in Cambridge, it might not work in Concord. But things that we think would be a good fit, and sort of come back with a top 2 or 3 that we think would be the most successful in Concord, and then we could have that discussion so we can sort of narrow down. I think it's a really good idea to work from ones that have already been tested and passed, especially if we want to reach the goal of doing something quickly that's not going to get bounced. And I think that getting our take as Concordians on what fits well here would be a good way to go.
Okay, I am certainly willing to do that. I hope other board members would like to take that homework assignment. Let me just ask Linda and Kate if you have anything else to add or questions before I open it up to public comment.
I'm pretty late. I was pretty late to the party. We didn't receive this presentation, wasn't circulated beforehand. Is that correct? So
Right.
yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of missed it. But it's so I think that's a great idea that Burton had about next steps. And it certainly does seem like to place it into the context of our goals for next year will kind of crystallize what it is that we want to do and in relation to the other things that we think we might need to get done. I do think it's still an idea that should be on the list is still doing an incentive with FAR, where if we drop the FAR, we let people stay where they are if they do all electric. And yeah, great. Thank you, Haley. I'm sorry that I missed the first couple minutes, but I look forward to reviewing it once it's up. Sounds like Elizabeth's putting it on the web page. So thank you.
Thanks. Linda, any questions or things for us to think about?
Just a lot for me to think about, and I thought Haley's presentation was great. So I think that's an excellent launch point for us to come up with some brainstorming and focus down on a couple of topics. So I'll try and do my homework.
Sorry, Kristen, I was just gonna say something. I mean, if it would be helpful, and Kate Hanley, tell me if I am saying this and you think it's going to be impossible, but I mean, from like an impact perspective, I think it could be pretty, back the envelope, but relatively easy to like quantify the impact of like an overlay in a certain area based on development you know is going to happen, or especially like focused in the commercial districts, like just to say like, okay, if we do an overlay district, it is going to have this, emissions reduction impact versus, if we do Y, it might only have like a portion of that, like if that is useful. I think it should be possible. Like given what we know, given what we know is going to happen in Thoreau district, or with the Thoreau depot, and then StarMet's like super far off, so maybe that's not even relevant. That'll be like required electric by that time. But again, like I know I'm on one end of the spectrum on this issue, but like my position is like this is coming hell or high water in a few years anyway. So like I don't feel that bad to tell a developer like next year go all electric, figure it out. It'll serve them better from their own business model, that they're getting ahead of the game, in my opinion. So, and I'm a developer, so I feel like I can say that.
To answer your question, Haley, yeah, I think with some assumptions, we can do some scenarios to see what the potential impact could be for different options.
That's interesting. One of the things I was wondering is, so we're talking about things that the planning board could do, and then Elizabeth mentioned some other potential things beyond the scope of the planning board. Kate Hanley is kind of, are you and your groups leading the charge on cataloging all that and saying like, here are the potential things and here are the groups responsible for them, so that the planning board understands we're not operating in isolation and this is our part, and then, you know, the other committees are doing that.
Yeah, so last summer we put out the climate action plan. So that's what kind of I'm working from in terms of priority actions, as well as the climate action advisory board. So in that plan, there are implementation blueprints that identify champions for all of those actions. So a number of them are me and my division of me. And a number of them include climate action advisory board, or, you know, multiple stakeholders in that process. So that's kind of what I'm working from in terms of priorities. But, you know, obviously as other things come up, you know, we're not just saying, no, we're not going to look at any other new ideas as they come up. So certainly I think, you know, the climate action advisory board is looking at other policy type options, things like commercial building disclosure ordinances, and really focusing on existing buildings now that Article 31 is on the docket for a town meeting that would address new construction. So we can certainly make sure we keep you all in the loop on what they're looking at, so we're not crossing wires.
That would be great. So we want to make sure that the planning board is not doing work that has already been done either by Haley, by, you know, the climate action board, and by the RMI Accelerator folks. So we've got lots of documentation to work from. We've got the information from RMI that was sent to us a while ago, and we'll get that back distributed again. We've got the climate action plan. You know, we always have the long range goals, but the climate action plan has very specific, you know, things. And then we've got Haley's new presentation where she's kind of boiling some of that down. So it does seem like we need to kind of read that and then prioritize some actions accordingly. So let's do that. Go ahead.
Kristen, one other thing, and I don't know, Kate, if Hanley, if this is something that you can help with, but a couple of times, this has definitely been something that the planning board during their process has come up. Nobody has been able to like develop this, you know, fact sheet of this is what it costs to, you know, to build per square foot if you go with, you know, electric and gas, and this is what it costs to build square foot if you go all electric. Because the last example, you know, what the board heard was, well, you know, my contractor and everybody's telling me that it's going to cost so much more to go all electric, and so that's why I'm not doing it. And I don't think that's the reality of the situation. You know, part of it may be the reality of the situation currently, where, you know, goods and services are in such high demand. But and I'm going to see Gary, Kate, Kristen. Gary has his hand up.
Yeah, I think so. Part of the RMI, the answer is yes, we have that information. Part of the RMI Accelerator, you know, RMI released a series of cities where they looked at the cost of a new all-electric construction versus a new fossil fuel home. The most local one to us that they did was Boston. We asked them to customize that analysis with Concord's electric rates. And so we have that analysis. I just got that reviewed by CMLP to make sure that it made sense. And so I actually have that on my to-do list this week to finalize that and send it over to you all, because I know that that's a question you get quite often. But the spoiler alert is that it is more cost effective to go all electric. It is cheaper upfront, and there are lower annual utility costs.
Thanks. That's great. I didn't know that you had that in your possession, so that's terrific. Gary?
Can I build on that response? Because in addition to what RMI has done, we actually, the RMI Accelerator cohort in Concord has engaged in discussion with a couple of developers in Concord. And we have one developer who has actually agreed to do an all-electric house so that he could understand himself what are the incremental costs of building all electric and what would be the, the impact on the developer economics, because we've been trying to understand this, as Elizabeth said, for a long time on this board or on the planning board. And so he has agreed to sort of work with us on this one particular development project that he's undertaking right now. So over the next 3 to 6 months, we may have, or 6 to 9 months, I don't know, we may have some information on the incremental cost and, what the market is for a property that is a green home, so to speak. So
That's great news. So thank you for kind of continuing to move the ball forward on that as well. Any other comments from the planning board before we kind of move on to public comment and Article 31? All right, so thanks again, Haley. You are not done by any means, so we'll continue to. And thanks for kind of pushing us forward and not just settling for, the minimum that we could do, but kind of helping us to stretch and really think about, having a lasting impact. So I know it's not easy because we want to do the right thing, but we really are operating within some constraints. So we've got lots of folks on the line tonight that I think are going to contribute to our public comment. I just want to make sure that what we were going to do with Article 31, we keep talking about it, and I want to make sure we actually explain what it is. I'd like the board to come to a consensus so we could take a position on this, so that we can make sure people at town meeting know how the board feels about this. And then we could get kind of feedback from the public before we take a position about everything they've heard so far. So is there anyone who would like to summarize Article 31? And that's what Elizabeth I asked her to send out. It was presented at the select board, so it was a great presentation you could watch. And so that's what I did to kind of get up to speed a little bit on it. And we've got some of the presenters as well. So Kate Hanley, I don't know if you would like to summarize what it is, and then I'll open it up to public comment.
Sure, happy to. So Article 31, I describe it as a 2-for-1 article. So it is a new bylaw that would require all electric new construction and requesting the home rule petition to enforce that bylaw. So it's very, very similar to what was going to be on last year's town meeting, which was Article 40, which was that fossil fuel free bylaw like Brookline had done. This year, it just the changes that we need to request home rule petition in order to enforce that bylaw. So that's very high level, Chris, and I don't know if you want me to go into more details.
I think that's great. It's just sometimes when we just keep saying the article numbers, sometimes I feel bad for everybody who's following at home. But did anybody from the board have a question about that? I just wanted to kind of hear from the public, and then I thought we'd continue our discussion about that. All right, so let's open it up to public comment about kind of anything that we've talked about so far, which is primarily the board's sustainability goals for the coming year, as well as if you had any stance on Article 31 and how the planning board should weigh in on that. Then we're going to talk about that. Just use the raise hand function if you would like to comment.
I'm sorry, Kristen, before you do that,
Yeah.
where's the text of the Article 31? Like I see some presentations, but I don't see the text of it. What's the best way to get to the text?
Here's my warrant. No, is it on the website? So there's probably under
Which website?
our town website. I'm trying to think where it would be.
You go to the town website under town meeting. If you find the 2021 town meeting warrant, it's a big document, but that's where the full text is.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Good question. So thank you. So while we're pulling that up, so this is the warrant article. I'm not seeing anybody raising their hands, which is surprising, but sometimes it takes a minute. If you would like to comment, put your hand up, and then we'll ask you to unmute yourself, and you can state your name and your address, and we can hear you. So Pamela Dritt.
Hi, I was wondering if it would be legal.
I'm sorry, could you state your name and address?
13 Concord Green, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4. Would it be legal for, after we've got assuming we miraculously get permission for the home rule enforcement of this needed legislation, would it be permissible for us to then amend it to remove the affordable housing exclusion and the fossil fuel generator exclusion, since there are better, cheaper alternatives to exclusion? In other words, I don't want to make it not pass, but if that will enshrine those exclusions forever without us being able to change it in the future, that might be a problem for me. Is it?
So if I understand your question, you're asking about if there's an amendment on the floor, would that be within the, would that be an allowable amendment on the floor?
No, I know that it would be an allowable amendment.
Okay.
Assuming that it passes without the amendment, next year, could we change it to remove the exclusion?
So as I understand the process, Article 31 is to have the select board make the request of the legislature to allow this home rule petition. And then however the language of that home rule petition goes through the legislature and gets adopted, that's the parameters that the town would have to work under unless it went back to the legislature to an amendment of those parameters.
So in other words, if we do get the legislature's permission to home rule, we would have to exclude affordable housing
If that
unless we amended it.
Well,
at the
my
town
understanding
meeting
is
this year.
then if a home rule petition is approved, then it becomes a bylaw. And so I would think then it would be the same process that any bylaw is amended would be allowed through future town meetings.
Right, so the home rule petition doesn't automatically just mean the town gets to do it. The town would either have to adopt a general bylaw or a zoning bylaw, whatever appropriate mechanism to implement that home rule petition.
And Elizabeth, your point was that the step is that the legislature says that they will allow a law in substantially the form, and they pass that law, right? That is that. So what your point is, it's what the legislature passes, which will ultimately determine the content of our bylaw, right?
Correct, but you go on the assumption that it's, the town is making this request of the legislature. So typically, I don't think the legislature, after it gets submitted, goes, and wildly changes, a request for a home rule petition. So, it's my understanding, and I'm not the best person to ask this question. You should probably ask the petitioners who submitted Article 31. But it's my understanding that how that law gets written. I mean, I don't think you can. If it passes and you go to either general bylaw or zoning bylaw, I don't think you can be more lenient or more restrictive than what was allowed under the law. Right. You can be more lenient, but Pamela, I would submit that question to the petitioners.
Who are the petitioners?
I don't know who submitted Article 31.
It's a select board article now, but well, I'd have to check with the town moderator. I think she'd be the best one to answer that.
Because with the exclusion for affordable housing, it fosters the perception that this is too expensive to do on a regular basis. And the truth is the opposite. So
yeah, I'd present your question to the select board and the town moderator.
And in addition, it makes the idea that affordable housing doesn't have to come up to the standards that regular housing does. And
Thank
that's
you.
a terrible perception. But I don't want to make it by bringing an amendment, I would not want to hurt the chances of this passing.
Right. And although if the exception is that the provision shall not apply to affordable housing, it doesn't mean that you couldn't still do it. Right.
I know
So-
we could do it, but it needs to be required.
And I think that particularly if it is cost effective, then they're definitely going to do it. But whether it's required or not, and I think that's what we're moving towards in the market, that the economic forces are going to drive, all electric construction. But until then, we need to
Too
have the
slowly.
stick. Sure.
Too slowly, and that was already be true 5 or 10 years ago too. And it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. What matters is the perception.
Mhm. Well, but we're getting some data too that I think is going to change the perception. So that's good. So thank you. That is a good question. And I appreciate if you would email that to the town moderator so that we've got that on the radar and that the rate folks maybe can address that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. So if there are anybody else in the public who would like to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand. Otherwise, what I was hoping the board would do is have a discussion about whether we should take a position on this article, which means that we could, write a little blurb that says the planning board is in support of this article, or in support of our affirmative action on this article, or takes no action on this article. So be thinking about that. I see one more hand up, John Cooley.
Yeah, it's more of a, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, John Cooley, 80 Highland Street, Concord. Just a question. I missed the first 25 minutes. Was there a presentation that was given that could be shared on the website?
So we did have a presentation for the first part, for about the first half an hour, about actions that the planning board might take to do with sustainability goals, and that will be on our website. The what we're
Okay.
talking about now for Article 31, that was presented to the select board, so that's definitely a recorded presentation that's available with Minuteman Media on YouTube.
Kristen, can I'm looking at the presentation now. It is on the town website. If you just Google Article 31 Concord, it'll come up.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so from the board, what are your thoughts? Who would recommend taking that, as we do take a position on this, or not take a position?
Can I ask, can I do questions now that?
Absolutely. I think we have several folks in the public who might be able to answer specific things about that. We have Jake Swenson, who I think participated in making the presentation. We've got Kate Hanley, and if there's anybody else, you can speak up. Yes, Kate McEnany.
Perfect, thanks. So the presentation says that is Concord the first to do this? And it says, no, Brookline, Arlington, and Lexington have already approved home rule petitions with a fossil fuel bylaw at their 2021 town meetings. So just to clarify, that means that they don't have the general court has not approved those home rule petitions, but the town voted to petition the
those.
general court. Is that true?
Correct.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And then this is a general question, and Kate, you're gonna be, I think, a good source for this. When you're like, there's slides and all these presentations showing the emissions from Concord, especially tracking, our goals, and it's broken up in different ways. And I'm sorry that if this came up earlier in the meeting, but does this show you the emissions from the electricity that we're consuming, or is it just like the emissions like from the combustion, like the combustion that's actually happening in Concord versus the electricity that's consumed where the CO2 emissions are happening, at power plants elsewhere in the state?
So gas emissions for the town that you see, as you said, broken up in different ways. It includes electricity that is consumed in Concord, as well as fuels that are combusted in buildings and in vehicles, as well as the emissions associated with waste generated in Concord. That's following the standard protocol that cities and towns do. So when you look at our emissions in Concord, about 60% comes from buildings, and that's a combination of fossil fuels and electricity.
And is that taking into account, do we in Concord are buying credits? So are those credits debited off of the electricity that's consumed?
Yeah, more so the way that the emissions are calculated for electricity, it's the amount of electricity that is consumed multiplied by an emissions factor, and that emissions factor takes into account the fact that 50% of Concord's electricity in that year, 2019, was carbon free.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I need to, this isn't really getting to the heart of this Article 31, but thank you for everyone's patience, and because they keep coming up across different, and so thank you for helping me understand. So yeah, that's it. So if anyone wants to lead up the discussion, let's do that.
We
Sure.
haven't discussed this before, so this is really kind of this board's initial discussion of it.
So I have a comment. So I'm just curious. I guess I know that I'm kind of curious to go back to the reason that the state, I think that the state regulates this, and the reason that the bylaw was turned down is because it conflicts with their authority. So I don't see in the presentation an explanation of why the state regulates this at the state level, and whether, and if there are interests there, that what Concord is, I mean, I'm assuming that there's a reason that it's regulated at the state level. So what does it mean for Concord to be doing this on its own vis-a-vis those interests? So, and not really seeing what those interests are here. It's hard to make that assessment. I can guess what they are, but I would be guessing. So I was wondering if somebody else
when you say that the state regulates it, can you mean the state regulates whether you can have a bylaw about electricity or energy generation? I just want to kind of clarify the it part.
Oh, thank you. I think that, let's see. Well, I guess we would start with an issue on why the state rejected these bylaws in the first place. But, and I'm sorry, I did read it and now I can't remember, but I know as it was being discussed, there was a contemplation that it was conflicting with tariffs of the gas companies or something. And so and in general, I think that there's these issues of development and energy use that are regulated by the state, and that the town doesn't have the ability to step on that. And so I think
The point is we're trying to get the ability.
well, but what are the,
It's a good question.
why is it regulated that way in the first place? Like, it seems like there's a reason for that.
I can jump in. Generally,
Please.
these things that are sort of like utilities and things, right? You remember thinking back to a time when they weren't in place. Things like utilities and interstate highways are hard to build unless you have preemptive legal authority to be able to site those facilities around a state, right? So you think about the straight lines that gas pipelines cut across New England, for example. Those things require preemptive authority at the state level and through siting boards and things like that. I would assume that the reason that the state said that we were stepping into an area that was preempted by the state was because of that authority to facilitate the development of gas and electric type infrastructure. But what they're doing here is, that decision didn't come from the rejecting our bylaw didn't come from the legislature. It came from the attorney general, right? That is their job is to interpret the existing laws. And what this home rule petition says is we're going to have the legislature change the law to expressly grant Concord the authority within, to sort of carve out that bucket from the preemption of the state law. And there's probably also federal regulations on utility siting as well.
Yeah, the Attorney General's decision was that the bylaw conflicted with statutes that preempt local regulations regarding the state building code and gas codes, and also a section of the law that requires uniform utility services to the public.
And so why do those statutes exist? Like, what are the benefits of having those statutes?
They allowed the development of electric and gas utilities in this country by, like I said, solving those issues of citing them, right, and placing them through, and then having uniform building codes, which I'm sure grew up around, safety and construction, that towns aren't equipped to write those kinds of things, but legislatures are equipped to do that and require it across the state.
So, so it's Concord's position that that the interests that we're advocating for in Article 31 are more important than whatever advantages there are through uniformity and the way the state regulates it, or is it that those advantages are no longer being the reason for needing that no longer exists for some reason?
I guess I'd have to defer to the proponent of the article.
I mean, I guess I can just say, and maybe Gary can chime in, the purpose of the article is really to address the health and welfare of Concord residents. And so in the warrant, it says that this article is, an important next step in meeting our greenhouse gas reduction goals that the town set at 2017 town meeting, as well as the state's climate goals. Gary, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add to that is, yes, the state does sort of preempt building codes on a routine basis because you don't want to have a chaos of, 351 separate building codes. You want builders to be able to act with uniformity across the state. However, I think part of the reason we're advocating this article at this time is not necessarily to create chaos, but if you have 17 towns requesting home rule petition for the same specific alternative net zero building code, that suggests and puts pressure on the state legislature to say there's an alternative rationale for regulating building codes that perhaps we as a state ought to be considering. So I think that, the strategy of the proponents is let's put out there and, get some pressure with a number of multiple communities asking for the same thing. The other thing that I would add is to Kate's point about the interests. Right now, the building code is set by the BBRS, which does have a number of building interests on it. That may be my opinion, maybe others' opinions, but I think there's an opportunity with this new climate law that is passed at the state level that perhaps the composition of the BBRS might change over time. But I think that the petitioners behind this article are certainly bringing a different perspective to the issue of building codes than what the BBRS has brought at the state level. So those are sort of the two pieces to the rationale behind why we're pushing this particular alternative, not chaos, but one particular alternative form of regulation for building codes.
And Gary, is the language of the amendment that's net zero, does that have a literal interpretation of what that means in terms of the building code?
Well, I mean, the state law that has recently passed is looking for a net zero building code. This is just, no new fossil fuel infrastructure. So it's a particular, right, our article is a particular way to achieve net zero. So we're not using the net zero language in our thing, but it's having the same effect. basically an immediate effect, rather than a net zero building, a building code that puts us on a path to net zero new construction by 2035. This would be effective as soon as we receive home rule petition authorization from the general court.
Thank you.
So I don't think I'm thinking about this nearly as deeply as Kate is, but at just like my very basic level, I guess, like what I've heard time and time again from the planning board over the past year and a half has been like, oh, we wish we could, influence that, but we can't. We have, our hands are tied, right? Our hands are tied. This is a chance for our hands not to be tied. So like, I obviously personally support this, but like as a planning board, I guess I don't see why we wouldn't be supportive.
Thanks. Nathan, Linda, what do you guys think?
I agree exactly with what Haley just said. We've been in positions before where having something like this in place would have been to our benefit to achieve goals we've talked about. So
make our job so much easier.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I mean, again, I would also be in support of something like this. So yeah.
Thanks. Linda?
Well, I agree that it's appropriate for the planning board to take a position on the article. And I think our voice would reflect certainly a knowledge base, even though we have not a lot of ability to implement on our own acts that really can make a difference, but I think our voice can be part of a chorus in this regard. So I think it would be appropriate to take a favorable position on this article. Yeah, I agree.
And Kate McEnany, I'll come back to you because you had some good questions, but Burton, what are your thoughts?
My thought is if we drew up 50 zoning bylaws that we could have that would make an actual impact, this would be number one on my list. We can't do it as a planning board, but I would strongly, and to the efforts Haley has put together, I think the first immediate step we can do is support this and support it strongly.
Thanks. And Kate, I know you had some kind of good questions, but seemed like you were getting at whether it was going to succeed at the legislature. What are your thoughts on the planning board taking a positive position on this?
Honestly, my thought wasn't whether it was going to succeed. And I'm trying to figure out, it's whether it's a good idea to cut up regulation of fossil fuel use and energy like this. But I think that's inconsistent. I'm nearly thinking about it in terms of like the state, like the state policy or the federal, the way like there's federal policies related to this too, and why it's regulated that way. But I guess that's not like, I need to shift my thinking into thinking as just as part of the planning board. So
right. Well, professionally, you do have knowledge of the regulatory process things, right? Is that maybe what's clouding your judgment?
Not a lot, apparently. No, I don't really know. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, there's a lot of interests like in energy planning that exist done purposely with like the broader view of the needs of the state or
well, you can still have your position. We can take a vote.
Right. So I don't know.
I
honestly don't know if I support it. I don't really know how this works either. Like if everyone else supports it, then the planning board just going to support it, right? So I wouldn't need to support it. Is that true?
So the board will, take a vote and you can vote yes, no, or abstain. Those are your three actions.
Right, understood. But it's not like
right. We're still, if the majority votes to take a positive position, then
yeah, you can just reflect that in the vote. So just to kind of bring this around after an hour and a half, because you have quite a few other things to get through. Would it be correct to just sum this up? Is the planning board believes Article 31 would provide the town the ability to move forward with sustainability actions in a measurable way, and the planning board recommends affirmative action on Article 31.
Yes. Do we need a motion?
If somebody would like to move that the planning board submit that statement to town meeting, that would be great.
I move that we submit that statement to town meeting. Support of that article.
Second the motion.
Okay, Linda seconds. All right, Mr. Bosdet,
Yes.
Mr. Flint, Ms. McEnany,
Abstain.
okay, Ms. Orbital,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
and this Ms. Ferguson, yes. All right, so thanks, Elizabeth, for drafting that. I know we're getting close to
You're
town
welcome.
meeting, so. All right, so, and thanks to the petitioners and Kate Hanley and everybody for kind of hanging in there for that discussion. So next on our list is just a follow-up discussion about the 2021 town meeting, a hearing that we had, and Susan Bates from the Select Board is on, and you know, she followed up to let us know that all of the items are on the consent calendar except for the two-family homes, which is great because it's new housing, and it'll be good to kind of have discussion about that if there's any remaining questions. Elizabeth, anything else about following up from the hearing?
No, I believe it was the fastest public hearing for 5 articles, but I didn't, any questions that came up, I think, when you get to your next agenda item, I think have been answered in the draft meeting materials and your report. Unless I forgot something, and when you read through your report, whether there's something that somebody wants to add, but.
Okay. All right, so town meeting, Sunday, June 13th. Be there. Bring your umbrella. Okay, so should we move on to the A&R?
Sure. Oh, well, is that next?
I thought so. Did I skip something?
Oh, well, part of your your annual town meeting public hearing follow-up discussion is reviewing your report, the draft report to town meeting.
Oh, okay. Do you have that to pull up?
I do.
Thanks.
Can everybody see that okay? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So Article 32 is the HDC's amendment to the Main Street Historic Districts to add those 2 properties and those structures. The HDC legislation requires the planning board to make a recommendation to town meeting. Anybody had any edits or comments on that one?
I do not.
Okay. The next is Article 35, which is the tree preservation bylaw amendment. So basically, when I wrote this draft, the reasons for the amendment is pulling out the part of the explanation that was in the warrant, but then including additional information as far as questions that might have come up at the public hearing. The board did receive one comment letter regarding the tree preservation bylaw, and that is, and I can bring up the warrant, for section 5.5A. And let me bring up the warrant, and you can see. And so every year, it always amazes me how many times everybody looks at these zoning bylaw amendments for months and months, and before they get placed in the warrant, and the minute the warrant gets printed, there's always something. So
We need to have Miss Felshen copy edit for us.
so it's this sentence right here that's being added. If an invasive tree is to be remain on a property within a setback area, it must be protected to the same degree as a protected tree to avoid damage to the tree so that it does not become a hazard to persons or property. And this section, and to avoid further infestation of invasive species, which contradicts the fact that if a property owner wants to save a Norway maple because it's beautiful, this last section, part of this sentence does not make sense. So in your report, deleting that section would be part of the amended motion, which would be just to affirmative action is printed in the warrant with the deletion of the words "and to avoid further infestation of invasive species" at the end.
Okay, and we can do that while it's still on the consent calendar?
Yes.
All right, thank you for doing that.
I already sent that to the town moderator for her review. And then the next item is the Floodplain Conservancy District. Again, just taking the explanation out of the warrant, kind of, paring it down a little bit. And then the outdoor parking for restaurant outdoor seating. And going through, so for the 2-family dwelling, pulling in the maps, and there were a couple, I believe, Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong, there was one question that was asked. Well, I do remember having envisioned Concord making, the whole statement, but I thought there was one other. Maybe that was the only comment that was made at the public hearing, other than having support for it. Nathan, did I miss something in this explanation?
I don't think so.
Okay.
That's the comment to have the full name I remember as well, so.
And then we had the earth removal bylaw, and then those are the only ones that require the planning board to make a recommendation and report. The question I will ask the town moderator is whether to include the board's recommendation for Article 31 in this report as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thanks for putting that together. Time is approaching.
So Linda has a comment.
Yep.
Just a comment going back to the parking regulation. I had heard, I think today, that Charlie Baker is going to extend the parking relief. And I just wondered if that will at all impact this article or people's consideration. What do you think?
So the governor has submitted to the legislature an amendment to open meeting law and that provision to allow outdoor restaurants seating to go through an expedited process through select boards, as well as under this current state of emergency executive order, medical billing, people not being able to move forward with collections for medical billing. So it's those 3 requirements that are currently under the state of emergency executive order that he has submitted legislation that those be allowed to be extended beyond the end of the state of emergency on June 15th, out to September. And to allow the continuation of virtual meetings until September 1st to give communities time and the ability to look to see how they might want to address those issues. I know the town of Concord is looking at developing a hybrid type model for public meetings where it could be in person, but also have some measure of virtual, the ability for people to participate virtually. So that's what he has submitted for the legislature to act on to allow those items beyond the end of the state of emergency. But it is only till September 1st.
Oh, I thought I'd heard November. the end
Oh,
of
I can't,
November.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I thought I'd heard the end of November, but that's not the case.
I
What-
thought
what-
it was September 1st, but let me, I can tell you in about 2 seconds. I'll look at the email again.
But thanks for bringing that up, Linda. There shouldn't be any harm, and Susan has a,
I think the end of November was for the outdoor dining piece. And the,
Oh, yes.
okay.
So the bill will grant municipalities authority to extend special permits for restaurants offering outdoor dining issued under the state of emergency through December 29th. And for the public bodies to have remote meetings is until September 1st.
And so to Linda's point, it shouldn't change anything with our proposed amendment, right? Because we wanted to make it, we wanted to formalize it regardless of state of emergency.
Correct.
Does that answer your question, Linda? I think that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. But
I mean, it's on the consent calendar, and I don't know if people, I don't know. I just wondered if people would think differently about it since it's, at least for this year, somewhat moot, but it's fine. I mean, I don't think we should feel differently about it, but I don't know if we need to say anything about that in our commentary.
So let me
That's all.
take a look. And it may be, I know in the report, it does talk about without a state of emergency, a restaurant that wants to add outdoor seating. So I think it's in here. This proposed amendment is intended to allow restaurants the opportunity to continue to offer seasonal outdoor dining without the need for a special permit by eliminating the required 1 space for 3 seats for only restaurant seasonal outdoor seating. So, I mean, I can kind of clarify that to say without a special permit under the state of emergency or by the zoning board of appeals. I mean, I can try to put that in.
If you can think of a way,
Oh.
perhaps.
I can't hear you, I'm
Any
sorry.
I didn't do any wordsmithing, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
And
okay.
it's hard to do that on the spot, but
I mean, I just want to make sure we don't make it more confusing than it needs to be. No, I'm not just saying that so that I don't get off the consent calendar.
we didn't have any questions about it from people, so I don't think it's gonna come up, but that's
But
all.
yeah, timing wise, just making sure that we kind of anticipate. And if people did have questions between now and then, they can opt to remove it from the consent calendar to discuss it further if enough people have questions about it. Good question. Any other questions about the report that Elizabeth has prepared before we do the A&R?
So two things, going back to Article 31 and the board's recommendation. I apologize, I don't remember. Did you take a roll call vote?
We did.
Okay.
As,
So because this is the official planning board's report to town meeting, the board actually does need to make a motion and to go through and
oh, for the whole report.
for the whole report. And I
Okay.
think the motion can just be moved that the planning board report to town meeting as outlined in the planning board's report and motions. Affirmative action on Article, I'm going to add 31 just in case. 31, 32, 35, 36, 37, 38, and 39.
You might have to put those numbers on the screen again. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I move that the planning board accept the planning board report and motion as described for affirmative action on Articles 31, 32, 36,
35
37,
30,
38, and 39.
and 35.
35.
And second that.
Okay, Mr. Bosdet,
Yes.
Mr. Flint,
Yes.
Ms. Orvidal,
Yes.
Ms. McEnany,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
and this is Ms. Ferguson, yes. All right. Thank you. Moving right along.
Moving right along. The next is an A&R plan on Monument Street. If the planning board remembers, a meeting or two ago, you reviewed Chapter 61A, first right of refusal for this portion, excuse me, of the property. This is on the east side of Monument Street, right at Buttricks Hill. And it is the redivision of these three parcels. And sorry, sometimes it's very difficult for me to find things on share. Again, so this is Monument Street at the top, Buttricks Hill Road, and the redivision is existing house 1, existing house 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lots. This lot 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all conforming as far as area and frontage. This is lot 20-4, which is conforming to area, and then it is a reduced frontage lot provided under the zoning bylaw with less than 200 feet, but more than 170 feet, which means that the house is required to be placed on the lot where the lot widens out to at least 200 feet, which that's beyond this point right here. So this house in this location.
Elizabeth, on an A&R plan like this, it looks like the access drive to that house in the rear goes over the other lot. Are we in approving the A&R plan, and are we to take into consideration whether there's street frontage, whether there's an easement for them to get to their house?
So the plan does show an easement, but the test for the planning board is whether each lot has adequate frontage to the buildable portion of the property.
Right. Okay.
Which this lot definitely has. This lot could easily just create a new driveway.
Right.
To have access to the buildable portion of the lot.
Okay, just
so-
curious. There's not a lot to say about A&R plans, so I was just curious.
Does anyone have any questions? Or would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we endorse the approval not required plan by Stamsky and McNary, Inc., titled Plan of Land, Concord, Massachusetts, for Bentley Builders, dated April 27th, 2021, and owned by Kingston Land Nominee Trust and Queenston Farm Nominee Trust, as approval not required. Because the plan is not a subdivision, because it shows a division of land so that every lot shown has the required frontage as required by the Concord zoning bylaw on an adequate public or private way, and authorize the chair, clerk, town planner, or director of planning and land management director to endorse the plan.
Second that.
Nathan seconds. Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Orvidal,
Yes.
Ms. McEnany,
Yes.
Mr. Bosdet,
Yes.
Mr. Flint,
Yes.
and this Ms. Ferguson, yes. All right, thank you. We have two sets of minutes. The first is from April 13th, which was when Chris from MAPC was with us. Did anybody have any amendments to make? Okay. I move that we, well, let's do both of them, then we can take a motion. What about the minutes for May 4th? Site plan review, that was for the Concord Children's Center. We had a lot of people on the line, a lot of comments. Make sure we captured everything and that there weren't any errors. Okay, I'm seeing no amendments. Thank you for such thorough notes. I would entertain a motion for the approval of both sets of minutes.
Kristen, I'll make a motion that we approve, gosh, though I just lost the dates, the minutes of the planning
April
board
13th, May 4th.
for April 13th and May 4th as drafted. Thanks.
I'll second that.
Okay, Ms. Orvidal,
Yes.
Ms. McEnany,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Flint,
Yes.
Mr. Bosdet,
Yes.
and this Ms. Ferguson, yes. All right, thank you. Now we are for updates, town planner updates, planning board liaison updates.
The one update I can tell the board is tomorrow morning I should be receiving the peer review for the traffic analysis for the Concord Children's Center. Excuse me. So that'll be posted to the website and sent to the board. What else? Yeah.
And any other updates from committee liaisons?
Kristen, just the CPC, as folks may know, it's constituted of I think 3 select board appointees and then representatives of about 4 or 5 committees in town. Turns out that this year a number of community preservation committee members are transitioning off the board. I know I've done the CPC the last 2 years, but I think it would be helpful if I was on the CPC again next year. That's all happening at the end of June. And so I'd like to be considered for that if possible. I just wanted to let people know that that was the discussion going on.
That's great. I appreciate you being willing to do that again.
So that will actually be part of the board's June 8th meeting, is the election of officers and liaisons.
Excellent. So that's our next meeting is June 8th, where it'll be Alan's last meeting. It will be election of officers and committees. And then we're also right now scheduled to have the Concord Children's Center on. Is that the only other agenda item that we know that we are is on?
No, 48Y Fitchburg Turnpike is also on that agenda,
Okay.
which I have no update for the board because I haven't heard a thing.
Okay. So then, so that's June 8th, town meeting on the following Sunday, the 13th, and then new officers take over after that. So any other updates? Oh, I'll open it up to public comment for the hangers honors. Oh, wait, there isn't a, speaking of elections and new people. So Andrew Boardman, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself or show your video. Welcome. Andrew has expressed interest in the planning board. And last night, the select board nominated him, which means that their next meeting, they can confirm that nomination and Andrew will be able to join the board after town meeting. So Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Andrew Boardman. We realized we lived in town for 10 years now. I grew up in Carlisle. My wife grew up in Concord, 3 kids, all the 2 oldest are in Thoreau School, and the youngest is actually at Concord Children's Center. I'm coming off a 6-year stint on the Public Works Commission. I didn't actually realize it had been that long until they told me in the last meeting that it would be my second to last. So that kind of took me by surprise, but you guys do a lot of interesting work and I'm excited to get my feet wet. I don't have all the lingo down yet, obviously, but I'll get there. I didn't know what water rights and things were, but now thanks to 6 years on the public work, I get it. So it'll be interesting and I'm excited to learn more as we go.
Excellent. Welcome. Well, that's why it's 5 years, right? It takes about that amount of time. Anybody questions, comments? Anybody want to grill Andrew about mass general laws or zoning bylaws? See what he can recall from memory.
No,
It's a little test we do before we let you on the board.
Well, I should also mention I'm a attorney by trade, so I'm a little bit familiar with some of it, but
perfect. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. We're really happy to have you. And Susan, thanks for doing the nomination for the select board. And we'll look forward to having Andrew join us. Now, is there any other public comment?
I just wanted to add, let me turn myself on here.
Yeah.
What Andrew said, that after you're appointed, you'll get a card in the mail and then you can go over to the town clerk, who's currently located in the Harvey Wheeler building, and she'll swear you in for that office and give you some reading materials. And welcome.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, how many more years do you have on the select board?
I'm entering my 3rd year.
Okay.
I'll be finishing up 2nd year at this town meeting and then starting year 3.
Okay. Excellent. Just getting the hang of it.
Yeah, really. It's a steep curve.
Yeah.
Planning board is as well, even steeper. You're 5 years. We only have 3.
Yeah. Well, you guys have to learn faster, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. I believe that's it. Elizabeth, let me know if I'm wrong. All right, let's adjourn at 8:55 and we'll see everyone in June. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good memorial.